The orbital station Zenit-Nine hung over the equator like a drop of glass stuck to the void. Its sections were connected by narrow airlocks, and old paint was peeling off the casing in places. Inside, it smelled of metal, oxygen, and emptiness. The air regeneration system fans hummed, the consoles were softly illuminated, and everything was as usual, boring, stable, and routine. The operators sat in their seats with belts across their chests. Some dangled their legs in zero gravity, scrolling through the readings from the sensors. The monitors displayed familiar telemetry lines. The graphs fluctuated within the specified limits. The moon slowly floated past the porthole. Everything went on as usual. The day dragged on, and no one expected that the calm would be interrupted in a second. "Hey, I've got a spectrum jump here," the technician from Post 6 said lazily, without looking up from his tube of jam. "On channel 43, a breakdown in synchronization. Electromagnetic?" The shift supervisor flipped a switch and moved closer to the screen. The line on the graph jumped, then suddenly went up, going beyond the range limits. 3 seconds later, the rest of the devices began to blink. First the inspection sensors, then the external surveillance system. The electronics began to cough, making clicking sounds as if someone was wheezing over the intercom. What the hell is this?" someone asked from the other end of the module, but no one had time to answer. An object flew past the station at monstrous speed. It was bright blue, shrouded in flashes, as if it were burning with electricity. The size was like a cargo shuttle, but its shape seemed to break in space. It flew out from the side of Saturn, whistled past, touching the side sensors, and disappeared into the depths of space, leaving no trace. Only at the moment when it went beyond the distant horizon, everything went dark. First the screens, then the auxiliary system, then the light. The last to die was the connection with Earth. There was silence for a few seconds. Even the fans, usually unnoticeable, stopped. The module's metal crunched, as if it were being squeezed from the outside. A slight echo hung in the weightlessness. Someone hit their head on the handrail. Someone quietly groaned. Alexei, the communications operator, reached for the panel, but it was dead. Next to him, Kostya tore himself away from his chair and floated to the emergency source, and, turning on the manual backup, only shook his head. "He turned everything off," Kostya whispered, looking into the darkness. "The entire sector. Look at Earth." Through the porthole, where the planet, strewn with the lights of megacities, was once visible, there was now only a dark ball. Not a single light, not a single line, not a single blink. The Earth was plunged into darkness as if civilization had disappeared. What the fuck is this?" Alexei squeezed out, not believing his eyes. The station was left drifting in total darkness, alone, deaf, cut off. All that was left was to wait, or hope that someone was still on the air. Something that rushed past Zenit-Nine and burned out the light went down in history as the blue lockdown. Some called it the blue darkness. Some simply called it the end. Cables snapped across the planet. Substations crunched. Dozens of nuclear reactors exploded, unable to withstand the transition to blind mode. But that was only the beginning. The cities were the first to disappear, as if a plug had been pulled from the global socket. In an instant, pumps, refrigerators, fans, water intakes, and ports stopped working. Drilling rigs stopped. All factories froze. People still did not understand what was happening. They pressed buttons, slapped monitors, looked for a cellular network. But the cellular network was gone, as was the satellite, as was the cable. That's it. Period. Panic set in on the first night. People living in big cities saw the stars for the first time and heard silence, but not the kind that calms, but the kind that makes your head itch. The pharmacies were the first to be taken out, then the supermarkets, then the gas stations. But there was very little fuel. Without electricity, the pumps in the tanks would not pump. People cut each other for a bucket of diesel fuel. Those who managed to hide in the rural wilderness, those who did not, died right in traffic jams and overcrowded cars. Elevators froze. Old people died in hospitals. And when on the second day it became clear that the light would not return, the horror began. Gangs, not yet completely brutal, were moving through the cities. They took houses, cut out warehouses, and looted. Hundreds of thousands froze in disconnected apartments. Someone tried to light a fire in the bathroom. Someone did not wake up in the morning. Corpses were stored right in basements while there was room. Then they began to store them in playgrounds. On the third day, the last batteries and canned goods disappeared. Then the slaughter began. They killed for a pack of buckwheat, for dog food, for a can of peaches. They shot, strangled, chopped with shovels. They found fire in the yards and neighbors in the bonfires. On the outskirts of the cities, the military tried to hold the perimeters, but the equipment was dead. The armored personnel carriers turned into tin cans. The soldiers fled, some to their families, some to the forests. Others took command, built camps. They quickly realized humanism no longer works. The first gallows appeared near shopping centers, right behind the tents with filtration. They drank water from puddles, boiled it on burners. But soon there was no gas or firewood. Those who still held out surrendered on the fourth day. They came on their knees with children, begged for food, and they got a cue, because there was no food anymore. Fires broke out in the big cities. No one put them out. Smoke hung over the city centers like a flag of the end. People ate everything, leather from chairs, paper, rats. Then they ate each other. In some areas where there were still some vestiges of power, they tried to keep track of the dead. They stopped on the fifth day. On the sixth, they started cutting up the bodies by weight. No one knew the names anymore. Faces were smeared with ash and blood. No one was making lists of the dead anymore. Everyone knew. Humanity had burned out in 3 days like a match. The Zenit-Nine station drifted in orbit, among dead satellites and a black, silent planet. Those who remained alive below stopped believing in the sky. There was no answer there. Only a cold void and a trace of blue fire that rushed through everything and turned off humanity like a broken spotlight. The office in the command compartment looked as if it had been ripped out of the last century and slammed back into harsh reality. Dusty cabinets with broken locks, a plywood table that once displayed seals, and a flag were now strewn with knives. Shell casings and empty cans of stew. An old topographic map hung on the wall, faded, stained with soot and blood, but still legible. Above it hung 2 kerosene lanterns that smoked so much that the light resembled morning fog in the black wilderness. Officers, sergeants, and 1 machine gunner sat in the corners, all in armor, all with faces that no longer showed sleep or fear, only work. The commander stood by the map, running his finger along a red circle drawn in a thick marker. This was an oil depot, the last one in the area, rumored to have not yet been plundered. "Attention," he said, not raising his voice. "Oh, we have 2 full tanks per unit, enough for there and back. The caravan will travel light. Trucks, 1 armored personnel carrier as cover, 2 pairs on motorcycles in front. The rest of the equipment remains. Without fuel, it's just dead junk." Someone coughed in the corner. Someone spat into a tin can. The commander continued, "If we take this point, we'll launch the equipment. We have 102 tanks, 3 armored vehicles, and a couple more Kamaz trucks in our hangars. Everything is on its last legs, but if we fill it with diesel fuel, they'll go. Then we'll be able to clear the city, then crush it, and then everything else. City after city, village after village. Whoever has the light has the power. Whoever has the fuel is the king." He took a step toward the table, slapped the rough surface with his palm. The lamp swayed in the draft. A shadow twitched in the corner, as if someone had raised a hand. "We will become the power. The only one. Without us, there is nothing. We are the beginning of a new state. Everything else is dust." The officers looked at each other but remained silent. The tension in the air was like smoke in an armored box. Then the commander turned to the sergeants and asked, looking each one in the eye in turn, "What's going on in your units? How are the mobilized?" Lieutenant Andreev stood up, broad-shouldered, with a flushed face and shoulder straps from which the stars had long since fallen off. He spoke roughly without beating around the bush. After the mobilization, it was a mess. They dragged everyone. Electricians, taxi drivers, shop assistants. They don't know how to do anything. They can't hold a weapon. They don't read instructions. They're scared of equipment. You have to yell at them, kick them, beat them up. Sometimes it helps. The commander listened silently, only clicking his fingers on his holster. Then he nodded and said slowly, "I see. So then, the first wave, mobilized. If there is an ambush, let them take it upon themselves. The equipment is under guard. The main thing is to return with fuel. Without it, everything else is junk. The guns do not fire. The armor does not move. And then, if possible, we will have leverage. Whoever controls the diesel fuel dictates the rules. This is the law of the new land." Silence fell over the room again. Somewhere in the distance, an iron door slammed, a stove creaked. The lamps continued to smoke, casting yellow shadows on the officers' faces. No one moved. "Disperse," the commander said without looking. "Prepare the train. We'll be moving out in 2 hours. It's not like last time. Now it's all or nothing." The sergeants stood up. Their flak jackets creaked. Their bolts clicked. In the shadows behind the locked door, the night raged, hungry, blind, walking through the ruins of the country. But in this room, a fire was already burning, not from kerosene, but from the one inside. Cold, clear, smelling of oil, gunpowder, and the new order. The commander of the oil depot walked slowly, measuredly, as if his every step had weight. The metal of the flooring rang under his boots. The pipelines and rusty gratings sagged, breathed as if alive. Tall, with a hard face, he seemed to be carved from the same iron as the whole place. A sergeant hurried behind him, stocky, round-faced, in an oversized flak jacket with a notebook stained with oil. The sergeant's glasses were fogged up, and he blew beads of sweat from his nose, trying to keep up. He reported as he walked. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, 67% of the tanks are filled in terms of volume," he said, puffing. "We are continuously distilling diesel fuel in a makeshift shop. The guys have set up 22 units. The distillate is flowing, although the quality is poor. But it burns, it warms, it pulls. The old barrels with hoses, reels, and lids with locks sticking out were called kustarka. Everything worked like a moonshine still. The stench was like a slaughterhouse. But life was born in these hellish homemade furnaces, that same diesel fuel without which everything would have fallen apart long ago. Oil came through underground pipes, was purified through filters, and was driven by steam through curved tubes. Everything rumbled, smoked, and spilled. But it worked. There's an attempted invasion in the north," the sergeant continued, lowering his voice. "A small group, 3 people. They took one. The rest, well, you can't count them now. They're probably some kind of reconnaissance team." The commander nodded, said nothing, and only turned toward the old building of the squeeze collector. Previously, pumps were running here, pumping out excess. Now it had been converted into an internal prison. In the center of the room was a huge pool from which diesel fuel was circulating, sticky, dark, with a greasy film. It stank so much that it seemed like you were falling into a swamp hole. Hoses hissed. Fuel oil was dripping somewhere, metallically hollow. The light was dim. The lamps on the wires swung from the vibration. The prisoner was sitting right next to the wall. He was wearing a gas mask. Otherwise, no one would have survived here. His hands were cuffed behind his back. His legs were tied with shackles that rattled with every movement. His suit was civilian, worn, burnt in places. His hair was stuck together. The gas mask was fogged up. The lenses were cloudy. He was breathing hoarsely, quickly, as if his heart was beating in panic. It smelled of fear, diesel, and death. The commander stopped opposite, looked at the prisoner through the yellow light of the lamp, as if he were a laboratory specimen. Then he said quietly, "Take off his mask. Let him tell where he came from, and who sent him." The sergeant came up, tugged at the belt. The rubber of the gas mask came off his face with a squelching sound. The prisoner coughed, wincing from the stench, his eyes watering. "Did you come for fuel, bitch?" the commander asked quietly, but so loudly that the room became cold. "Or did you just want to see how people live when everyone else can't move?" The prisoner was silent, swallowing, his mouth dry. It smelled as if he had been sitting in diesel fuel for a week. The sergeant pulled out a crowbar and quietly clicked it on a nearby pipe. The sound was like a blow to the skull. The flow of fuel continued to circulate below. There was no law, no mercy here. Only one question: are you alive or expendable? The prisoner coughed, then jerked sharply and laughed with blood on his lips, hoarsely, with a break in his voice, as if he had exhaled the last of his anger. The laughter thundered in the walls, bouncing off the rusty pipes, as if someone were slapping empty canisters on the floor. His voice sounded like the scraping of nails on metal, but the words were clear, with contempt, with a grin. "Do you think you can sit here like rats in a bunker?" He raised his head, looked straight at the lieutenant colonel. His eyes filled with malice, his lips trembled with rage. But there was something all too familiar in this fury. The prisoner looked closely, blinked as if remembering, and asked hoarsely, "What, did you sew your own shoulder straps, warrant officer? I remember you. Fuel and Lubricants Depot, Zone 38. We used to drive equipment to your place for refueling. You were always confused in your calculations, you pompous moron. You stole everything little by little. For years. And now you're a commander?" The lieutenant colonel stood rooted to the spot. His eyes narrowed, his fists slowly clenched, but he remained silent. The room grew even quieter, as if even the pumps had quieted down. The prisoner laughed hoarsely again and leaned forward as far as his chains would allow. "What? You remembered, bitch? Remembered how you were rummaging through our boxes? Now we have equipment, we have tanks, we have people. And you're here boiling your shitty diesel fuel in barrels like homeless people. You think you can hold on? Fuck you. This will be our world. We'll build it on the bones of people like you." The sergeant was the first to react. He took a sharp step back, jerked the bolt. The sound of the bolt resounded in the room like a shot, booming, loud as if someone had hit a steel door. The commander turned sharply, stepped toward him, and grabbed the forend of the machine gun. "Not here, idiot!" he hissed through his teeth. "You want us to fly to hell?" "The diesel fuel is right there, under us. All it takes is one spark, and there won't be a wet spot left on us." The sergeant froze. His eyes widened. His fingers trembled on the trigger, then let go. Silence returned to the room, oppressive, like after an artillery strike. Only the drops of fuel oil continued to fall from the upper pipe. Drip, drip, drip. The lieutenant colonel looked at the sergeant's face for a few more seconds, then turned and walked up to the prisoner. The latter looked up at him, angrily, with a bloody grin. "Take him to the pit," the commander said dully. "Without food, without light, let him rot." The sergeant nodded and clapped his hands. Two men in black coats and respirators came out from behind the door. The chain clanked tightly, as if it was no longer a person but just cargo. The prisoner jerked, spat on the floor, but they were already dragging him away, past the tanks, along the pool of diesel fuel, past the pipes where the future world was being cooked. The lieutenant colonel stood in the roar of the machines and the fumes of kerosene. He looked at the liquid in the tank as if it were a sacred relic. This black stream was his chance, his cross, his war. The battle began at dawn. The fog still hung over the pipes, the ditch was damp from the night, but the stench of diesel did not cease for a second. A mass was moving on the horizon, a wave of figures in civilian clothes, some in jackets, some in aprons, some in tracksuits with torn sleeves. They walked unevenly, without formation, clutching rusty machine guns, hunting rifles. Some were holding rebar. It was clear from them. They were not fighters, but their eyes were empty. Behind them, whistles, shouts, single bursts. The commanders drove their own forward like a herd, not giving them a chance to escape. The defense of the oil depot met them without sentimentality. First, the machine gun started talking, from the towers, from the trenches, from the windows of the concrete caponniers. The bursts hit thickly with a roar into the body, into the mud, into the concrete. People fell immediately, some on their backs, some with their heads blown off, some with a last cry, followed only by a wheeze. Shells from homemade mortars exploded near the barrels, gushing fuel oil. Shells rained down on the corrugation. Steam poured out of the barrels. Some of the civilians fell and remained lying there. Some rushed back, but shots rang out behind them. They were not let go. They went on, forward, into the meat. And then the tanks appeared, old, covered in soot. They roared, their tracks crumbling the earth. One fired a burst from a machine gun at a concrete wall. Part of the tower shattered into rubble. A groan rolled along the inner perimeter. The second tank moved along the embankment, pressing itself into the ground, like a bull before impact. The shooting did not stop. The air tore, whistled, growled. Everyone died, on both sides. Those who did not fall from the bullet burned. Those who did not burn choked on smoke. The lieutenant colonel sat in the command building, in the corner of the headquarters where the switchboards and maps used to be. Now all that was left were charred walls and the groans of the wounded on the floor below. In one hand he held a pistol, an old Yarrigan, wrapped in duct tape. In the other, a remote control. Radio detonation, the last trump card. Explosives had been planted all over the base, in pipes, under barrels, in the pump room. It was a plan codenamed Caper Cayley. If they got the better of them, everyone would burn. He didn't move. He just listened to the rumble die down. First distantly, then closer, then steps. 3. Heavy soles. The creak of the door. They came in, unhurriedly, like they owned the place, one in armor with a black chevron. An officer. He grinned, looking at the lieutenant colonel. "Oh, Samvelich, great. We're visiting you. Will you fill up our equipment?" 102 units. Haven't you sold all the diesel to the left yet? Samvelich looked up at him. His lips trembled. He exhaled through his teeth. A grin twisted his face like an old wolf's before it bit his throat. "You'll get screwed, Igor," and pressed the button. The world shook. The explosion came in a wave, first the insides, then the walls. The concrete howled underfoot. Flames tore through the floor. Kerosene, fuel oil, diesel. Everything burst into flames at once. From underground, from reservoirs, from old tanks, from hoses, from pipes. The base exploded like a volcano. Blazing death engulfed everything. The battle was over instantly. Only a black mushroom rose into the sky where there had once been hope. Humanity continued to go mad. After the blue darkness, after the fall of cities, after fires, robberies, and the first acts of cannibalism, the remnants of the old world disappeared. Laws no longer applied. Borders spread. Armies disintegrated. A slaughter began without flags or slogans. People hunted each other like game for a piece of bread, for a battery, for a woman. Cities turned into traps, corpses, rats, and hunger inside, gangs outside. No one built, treated, or pitied. They walked over heads, bodies, and bones. The villages died out quietly, without shooting, without screaming. It was just that one day, no one opened the doors. No one went out on the path. Everything was overgrown with nettles and moss. Wolves appeared again in the wild forests. Bears came out to the empty highways. Moose walked along the rusty rails. People began to pray to what killed their world. Some burned books. Others, on the contrary, prayed to the schemes of old generators looking for the keys to the light. Cults appeared. Some made sacrifices to transformers. Others ate lamps. believing that there was energy inside. Still others built altars from microwaves and worshipped the socket. Everyone fought with everyone. Detachments of former soldiers slaughtered all those uncontrolled. Gangs hunted those who refused to give diesel fuel. Prisoners were tortured, chopped up, turned into food. Children no longer laughed. They only looked at the ground. Women gave birth in basements, without sounds, without light. Often dead. Sometimes not from people. There were almost no old people left. They were eaten first. A year passed, and it only got worse. In the second year, the food ran out completely. There was no canned food, no cereal, no mice left. People ate dirt, then the skin of the dead, then each other. Diseases returned like karma. Typhus, cholera, plague. They came like tornadoes, swept everything. Without antibiotics and doctors, no one lived longer than a week. Only the strong, the cruel, and those who had lost their human appearance remained. In the third year, there were no more words on the streets, only screams, groans, and stomping. The cities were empty, and suddenly he came back. On the third spring, amidst the black sky and dead forests, rusty towers and silent generators, the blue light flared again. The object streaked across the surface of the earth at silent speed without warning. It glowed blue, as if death itself were pulsing in its gut. It glided over the equator, just like 3 years ago, and everything turned on. Light. Everywhere. At once. Lights came on in empty apartments. TVs flashed in shop windows where corpses had long been lying. Refrigerators began to beep. Streetlights came on. Neon signs began to glow again. Even satellites began to move in orbit again. Everything that was dead turned on. Power returned. Electricity flowed through the veins of civilization like blood through a body. Only there were no bodies left. There was no one to rejoice. No one turned on the kettle. No one took out their phone. Somewhere, at the station, a board lit up. Train arrival at 1800. Somewhere an escalator turned on and continued rolling ashes. What it was, no one knew. A space traveler? An experiment of the gods? People no longer asked questions. They were gone. They had eaten themselves before the light returned. The earth became a museum of an extinct species where electricity worked again. Only there was no one to light the lamp.